This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Well, good evening and welcome to the very first U.S. report of 2024. Coming up tonight, the countdown to the presidential election is officially on. We'll break down all the highlights from the Iowa caucus with Mick Mulvaney, plus look ahead to the New Hampshire primary with John Fund, where there are a few surprises in store. Also tonight, are we on the brink of a wider Middle East war, and what does that mean for the presidential election? Mike Doran joins me fresh off the back of 10 days in Israel. And a brand new segment, Joe versus reality. You're not going to want to miss that. But first, well, I think we can say safely that the starting gun has well and truly been fired on the presidential race, which is, for the moment at least, but just for the moment, looking very much like a Trump-Biden rematch, which is to say a race between two men who have 157 years on this planet between them. Let's check in and see how the two candidates are doing, shall we? Here's Donald Trump campaigning a night or two ago in New Hampshire, site of the next presidential primary next week. And remember, as he speaks, he's got to clear out his opponents Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis before he can take on Biden.
The people behind Nikki Haley are pro-amnesty, they're pro-China, they're pro-open borders. You know, she wants open borders, don't kid yourself. Pro-war, and they're pro-Biden, because those are the people that are sending them. Biden people are coming in, they have Biden stuff, and they're coming in to register and to vote in your primary. It is crazy. The radical left Democrats are supporting Nikki Haley because they know she's much easier to beat than Trump. And you know what? If she weren't, they wouldn't be doing it. But, you know, they're great disinformation people. Misinformation, disinformation. You know, they're almost the same, but not quite. But let's not go into definitions right now. They're very close, actually. A lot of people still don't understand it.
So, question for you out there. Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis? Which candidate do you think he's more concerned about? I knew the answer to the question that morning after the Iowa caucuses and saw in my email inbox not one or two, but 5 emails from the Trump campaign attacking Nikki Haley for being a warmongering, open borders-loving tool of the Democrat establishment. And this is just a small bit of the full court press we are going to see against Haley over the next few weeks, and probably at least through so-called Super Tuesday in March. And let's be clear here, Trump has a real point about Haley. Nikki Haley has gotten big bucks, including a pile of money from Reid Hoffman, one of the founders of LinkedIn. Make no mistake, along with never-Trump moderate Republicans, a lot of people would love to see Trump knocked out and Haley win the nomination. Because for them, it's a no-lose situation. Either Haley becomes a female version of Mitt Romney and they tear her down the same way they did old Mitt, maybe without accusing her of having binders full of women, or she wins against Biden, and the establishment is still spared the horror of a MAGA presidency. Meanwhile, let's check out, on the other side of the ledger, how Joe Biden is doing. Well, he went on vacation on December 23. Hey, so did I. But I think even I managed more public appearances than the president did since then. I mean, have a look. He was, though, looking pretty vigorous over the break.
This is Morgan Sherwin and Sam Cerruti. They're our team members here. They help us. They help us, service and sales. Good to see you.
Yeah, such vigor. So totally with it. Performances like that are why, along with Hunter Biden trouble that is still brewing, I think there's a very good chance that Joe Biden does not make it to November, and indeed steps down or is pushed aside for a new, younger candidate. But I also think there is something else that is happening, and that is a reassessment of the first term of the Trump presidency. And it's a message that is going to start being heard loud and clear, that you don't need to like the man to like what he did in office. Since we last got together, the global and domestic situation has become increasingly worse. Houthis, supported by the Iranians, who themselves have been empowered by Biden's policy of giving money and power to Tehran, have opened another front of the war in the Middle East. Iran has been shooting at American and Pakistani targets. China has increased its saber-rattling against Taiwan. Hundreds of thousands more illegals have crossed the border into the U.S. And U.S. inflation, once again, was higher than expected. So, going swimmingly, right? People in America are waking up to this, and people you wouldn't necessarily expect. One of them is Jamie Dimon, global CEO of J.P. Morgan, who had this to say at, of all places, the Davos conference Thursday.
When people say MAGA, they're actually looking at people voting for Trump, and they think they're voting, and they're basically scapegoating them, that you are like him. But I don't think they're voting for Trump because of his family values. Now, if you look, just take a step back, be honest. He was kind of right about NATO, kind of right about immigration. Mm-hmm. He grew the economy quite well.
China virus.
Tax reform worked. Mm-hmm. He was right about some of China. I don't like what he did.
No, I said China virus.
Yeah, I understand. He may have been right. And I don't like how he said things about Mexico. I don't like, but he wasn't wrong about some of these critical issues, and that's why they're voting for him. And I think people should be a little more respectful of our fellow citizens. And when you guys have people up here, you should always ask the why. Not like it's a binary thing. You're supporting Trump, you're not supporting Trump. Why are you supporting Trump?
It's hard to hate 75 million of your fellow Americans. And
I agree.
It's done criminal.
And, the Democrats have done a pretty good job with the deplorables, hugging onto their Bibles and their beer and their guns. I mean, really, could we just stop that stuff and actually grow up and treat other people with respect and listen to them a little bit?
Now, I mean, that's really huge. It's remarkable coming from somebody who is at the absolute top of the elite food chain there. And the whole thing was also a real slam on the media as well, who have never shied away from going after Republicans, even when they call for civility against Democrats. So that's why I think this year is shaping to be up to be interesting in all sorts of ways. So, as the kids on the internet say, buckle up. Let's get right into it now with Breitbart Politics editor Emma Jo Morris. Emma, thanks for joining me on the very first U.S. report of 2024. Now, big win for Trump in Iowa, and of course, the media went into full meltdown mode. Check out MSNBC's Rachel Maddow here, explaining why viewers should be spared the horror of having to hear Trump. Listen to this.
At this point in the evening, the projected winner of the Iowa caucuses has just started giving his victory speech. We will keep an eye on that as it happens. We will let you know if there's any news made in that speech, if there's anything noteworthy, something substantive and important. The reason I'm saying this is, of course, there is a reason that we and other news organizations have generally stopped giving an unfiltered live platform to remarks by former President Trump. It is not out of spite. It is not a decision that we relish. It is a decision that we regularly revisit. And honestly, earnestly, it is not an easy decision, but there is a cost to us as a news organization of knowingly broadcasting untrue things. That is a fundamental truth of our business and who we are. And so his remarks tonight will not air here live. We will monitor them.
Now, Emma, I knew MSNBC viewers were snowflakes, but do they really need to be spared even hearing a little bit of Donald Trump in Iowa?
It's amazing. First of all, I always, whenever there's an election that has anything to do with Trump, I always turn to MSNBC because I can gauge how well it's going, not by the numbers on the screen, but how suicidal the panel is that's on at that moment. So, it's incredible how emotional they get, and that was so amazing, especially from Rachel Maddow, who, by the way, is a very smart person. That is a Rhodes Scholar that you just heard say that. This is not some clown that they picked up off the subway on 47th Street outside Rockefeller Center. This is a person, though, who sat on the air for over 4 years, for the entire duration of Trump's presidency, and said with a straight face that the elected president of the United States was a Manchurian candidate who was in collaboration with Putin running some nefarious scheme to somehow give Russia control of the country, or unclear actually what really the claim was. But in any event, she was maliciously lying to her audience for 4 years with a straight face while having, the former CIA director John Brennan do it with her. So I don't really understand how she says that, and we're all supposed to forget her top-rated show spewing absolute nonsense for the last however many years. Please. And
I mean, it's crazy because they pull up shows that come from the right on any tiny little factual thing, but apparently on the left you can just get away with that. But speaking of weird stories of people lying and not telling the truth here, this is a fascinating story that broke over the break here, and I want to bring this to Australian viewers here. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had a health emergency, suffered complications from surgery, didn't tell anybody, including the president, that he was going on this medical leave for days. And now this audio has come out of his aides calling an ambulance for him and telling the ambulance service, don't make a big deal about it when you come to the house. Listen to this.
Can I ask, can the ambulance not show up with lights and sirens? We're trying to remain a little subtle.
Now, this whole weird thing of the defense secretary in the middle of multiple global security crises going AWOL like this, well, how is this acceptable? This feels like something, Emma Jo, out of like the Chinese Communist Party where top officials just disappear like this.
Yeah, this is nuts. I mean, honestly, actually, the 911 call, I mean, it adds color to the whole saga, but I wouldn't, D.C. is a very small town, and everybody knows, especially if you have a high-profile person like Secretary Austin living on your street, everybody kind of knows who lives where. And I can see why they would have wanted maybe the sirens shut off on the ambulance to come pick him up. I can see why that wouldn't maybe be something that they're broadcasting to the general public. But the fact that they didn't tell the White House is just remarkable. That is such a scandal. It can't be overstated. I mean, we have multiple theaters right now where we either have direct interest, we have direct involvement, or we've inserted ourselves, like in the case of Ukraine. And the fact that he just kind of took off, didn't tell the boss while he's apparently leading this army is shocking and terrifying.
Indeed it is. Now, finally, before I let you go, I got to ask you now, because you're an expert on all of this misinformation and disinformation stuff here. The government has finally come out, the DOJ has come out and in a filing confirmed that Hunter Biden's laptop was, in fact, the real deal, and they knew about it the whole time. This means the president lied, the Department of Justice lied, and, of course, all of these social media companies that censored what was the truth about this, they also lied. Tell us more about this and what this means in terms of these ongoing efforts to censor not just the Hunter Biden laptop, but anything that people in power decide is misinformation.
Yeah, well, there's a reason why we don't have a ministry of truth in America and in any, free-thinking society, is because the government is stacked with liars. Shocking, I know. But the thing is, this is ought to have the American people absolutely furious, and surely does. A poll came out just last week that 71% of the American public believe that the censorship of the laptop from hell, of the Hunter Biden laptop reporting, did impact the outcome of the election. And then obviously, you have Joe Biden, who's perhaps the slipperiest man in America, aside from maybe his son, who will never come out and apologize for the disinformation that he spread on the debate stage when he was confronted about the dealings of his family and his son and what that implicated for him. So it's disgusting, but it's not surprising, and it's just it's another instance of how we need regulation, obviously, to protect the public square from government interference, because these people have no problem throwing an election with it.
Emma Jo Morris, Breitbart Politics Editor, thank you so much for joining us. And for Australians, this is a great cautionary tale about that misinformation bill Labor is trying to get up later this year. Emma Jo Morris, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Now, Iowa and Donald Trump's thumping victory. Or was it? Let's bring in my next guest. I know he's one of your favorites, and he's definitely one of mine. Former congressman, former chief of staff to none other than Donald Trump, and of course, senior advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, welcome back. Happy New Year, and let's talk Iowa. First of all, Donald Trump had a huge majority on a freezing cold night, but still only about 40% of Republicans who did show up actually voted for him. Is this, as some on the left are saying, a weakness for Trump come the general election?
Hey, James, it's good to see you. Happy New Year. Happy 2024 election year. So, yes, a new year. We're coming right smack dab into the middle of the campaign. Trump did very well. He did. I think he pulled about 52% at the end of the day. That's a good number. He could have won with 40%. He could have won with 42%. But if he did, there'd be a lot of discussion about more people voting against him than voting for him. But he did extraordinarily well, I think. He's doing very well, by the way, in New Hampshire, South Carolina. He's above 50% in just about every poll I've seen in all of the early voting states, with the possible exception of New Hampshire. There was a chance here that Ron DeSantis might have stolen some of his thunder by doing better than expected. He did a little bit of that, passing Nikki Haley, but neither of them were close to Donald Trump. I think Trump won by 30 points over both Haley and DeSantis, and that's a thumping victory any way you look at it.
Yeah, no, that is pretty huge. And the question then becomes, where do Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis go? I was pretty amazed to watch Nikki Haley get up. She came in third and said, hey, it's a two-person race. It's just me and Donald Trump. Is she now, because as I said at the start of the show, Nikki Haley is clearly the one that Donald Trump wants to take out. She's got a lot of big money behind her. Is that where the fight now is?
It is, for a variety of reasons. By the way, I watched the same speech. I watched it live, and all I could think to myself was someone wrote that for Nikki at the beginning of the day. They expected to finish second, and they didn't. And it's actually hurt Nikki a little bit. She's lost a little bit of momentum, but she's going now into New Hampshire. Here's what's interesting, James, about New Hampshire. It's one of the handful of states where pretty much anybody can vote in a primary. So Nikki's actually out there now catering to and appealing to unaligned, say, centrist independent voters, maybe even some Democrats, trying to get them to cross over to vote for her in this primary. That's why I think you're going to see a margin in New Hampshire that's different. Nikki Haley, for example, depending upon the polling that you're seeing, is someplace down by 4 to 14 points in New Hampshire, where she just lost Iowa by 30. The difference there is not really Nikki Haley or Donald Trump. The difference is who gets to vote in the primary. So when these non-Republicans get to vote in a Republican primary, it can change the outcome. She doesn't care. She wants to win the state. She's got a small chance of doing that. She wants to at least do a really, really strong second, because the next state down the pipe is South Carolina, her home state.
Yeah, so is what you're talking about now what we call in Australia strategic voting, where people aren't going to vote for their party that they want to win, but they want to send a message and create a bit of chaos for Donald Trump. Is that what's going to happen here next Tuesday?
That's exactly right. You're going to see Trump win probably in New Hampshire, but this will be his narrowest margin, I think, out of any state that I've seen.
Right. And then then we go forward. Donald Trump still remains presumptively the nominee. Is it too early to start talking about his options for running mate? I've heard talk about New York Congressman Elise Stefanik. I've been saying Vivek Ramaswamy might be up for it, although I think communications director would be great for him. There's even been talk of Tulsi Gabbard. What do you think? Where would you see him going? And is it just too early to make the call? Because ultimately it's just going to be up in his head at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's not too early. In fact, that discussion has started in earnest. I'm hearing rumors out of Mar-a-Lago about all those names that you just mentioned. There's a couple of folks you haven't mentioned. Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, is very tight with Donald Trump, and she would be a very strong vice presidential candidate. The other name that I'm hearing a good deal about is Dr. Ben Carson. Carson was in the cabinet with us in the first Trump administration. He and the president are very close. They get along fairly well. And this is an interesting factor, James. What I'm hearing out of Mar-a-Lago is that the president is worried about putting someone on vice president and in a vice president who would immediately start running for president. Because keep in mind, he can't run again after he wins. He can only win twice. So if he wins, he's immediately a lame duck. And there's concern in the Trump world about putting somebody like Stefanik in there, like Nikki Haley in there, who might be somebody who immediately starts running for president, and thus maybe upstages the president a little bit. So there's that. Maybe they're looking for somebody who's a good vice presidential candidate, but who doesn't want to run for president, him or herself, after this is over. By the way, there's precedent for that in the recent past. It's one of the reasons that George W. Bush picked Dick Cheney.
Right, fascinating. So I think what we're looking at here is the first case of two lame ducks running against each other in American history, which is absolutely fascinating. Mick, we're going to have to leave it there, but we'll see you again next week or very soon here on the U.S. Report. But you don't go anywhere, because next week, as we said, is the New Hampshire primary. And Joe Biden could be on the verge of making a fatal mistake there. Joe Biden will let us in on the secret problem the Democrat Party has that they're hoping no one notices. But in the meantime, have you ever looked at Joe Biden and thought, I mean, all jokes aside, he's not looking too great. Like, it'd be pretty natural to wonder if the president is getting all the care he requires. Well, guess what? You don't have to worry, because he is. And you know what? So too can the special senior citizen in your life, thanks to White House Senior Living. Have a look.
At White House Senior Living, our residents feel right at home. Our vibrant facility offers delightful activities and outings, round-the-clock professional care, and exquisite house-made meals.
Well, I've been eating everything that's put in front of me. I've been eating all Italian foods, basically.
And ice cream.
And ice cream, chocolate chip ice cream.
White House Senior Living, where residents feel like presidents.
Ah, yes, where residents feel like presidents. New Hampshire Nightmare up next on the U.S. Report. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. In a moment, I'll be joined by one of your favorites, John Fund, who is going to walk us through how Joe Biden could blow it in New Hampshire next week. But first, we have to have a little talk about Vivek Ramaswamy and what he does next now that he's dropped out of the presidential race. There's a lot of people who want to see Trump name him vice presidential running mate. But I have a better idea. Trump should instead make Vivek his press secretary or director of communications. Why? Well, simply because Vivek Ramaswamy has shown time and time again that he has the skill and the chops to dismantle lazy and dishonest journalists who are determined to take conservatives down. Have a look at this exchange from the Iowa campaign trail the other day, where Vivek schooled the media on everything from their reporting on the Hunter Biden laptop to the origins of COVID-19.
You all said that it wasn't for a long time. By show of hands, was the Wuhan lab the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic? Everybody, media or not. So you have reported, the same media that has reported that the COVID-19 pandemic did not originate in a lab in Wuhan, is willing to even say, unwilling to admit today, is the Hunter Biden laptop story as reported by the New York Post, which was shut down, had the Twitter account locked for anybody who is even sharing the story of the Hunter Biden laptop found on the eve of the last election. The media reported that it was Russian disinformation on the eve of that election. Does anyone here agree that the Hunter Biden laptop story, as reported by the New York Post, was indeed accurately reported and was not Russian disinformation, but was in fact a factually owned laptop of Hunter Biden? Yeah.
I'm not sure why we're talking about that.
Because it was election interference on the eve of the last election. And I think there's the same kind of election interference happening this time around.
And that's not the first time he's done that sort of performance. Look, in this election, more than any other, the press has taken it upon itself to make sure that what they think is the correct candidate wins. The great tell in all of this is when they talk about preserving our democracy, not democracy itself, which means that if you don't vote the way they say you should, well, you're not democratic and you're instead beyond the pale. That's why I reckon keeping Vivek out there, front and center, to keep the you-know-who's honest wouldn't be a bad move for Trump. Well, we are less than a week out from the New Hampshire primary, but it's not going to be quite the same as in previous elections. That's because last year, the Democratic National Committee stripped the state of its long-running first-in-the-nation primary status in favor of South Carolina because, you guessed it, diversity. But New Hampshire decided still to schedule its primary first anyway, and as a result, the result will not be recognized by the Democrats. And because of this drama, President Joe Biden has decided he will not even appear on the ballot. At the same time, his supporters have launched a write-in campaign, meaning they've got to scribble the name Joe Biden on the ballot to get him up. It's all very complicated, and it poses an awful lot of dangers for Joe Biden, who is polling terribly across the country, including with Democrats. Joining me now to work all of this through is political journalist John Fund. John, thanks for joining us. You've written a fascinating piece in the Wall Street Journal about all of this. Walk us through what has happened and what the danger is for Joe Biden.
Well, a year ago, when Biden decided not to put his name on the ballot in New Hampshire, two things happened that he didn't expect. One, his poll numbers started to tumble. They have fallen now to 31% in the latest ABC News poll. His average of all the polls is about 37 or 38%. 57% of Democrats in the ABC poll don't want him as their nominee. And a second thing that happened is an unknown challenger appeared. He scared away the big persons in the race, but Dean Phillips, who's a little-known congressman from Minnesota, decided to challenge him. The reason that's significant is it was 1968 when a little-known member of Congress from Minnesota named Eugene McCarthy decided to become the only person challenging Lyndon Johnson, who was weighed down by inflation and foreign policy disasters, Vietnam at the time. And Eugene McCarthy campaigned all over New Hampshire. Johnson stayed away. What happened? Johnson went from 70% in the polls down to 49% on election night. It was a Pyrrhic victory. The loser, McCarthy, was declared the winner by the media. Johnson was humiliated. And 2 weeks later, Johnson decided to drop out of the race and no longer run for president. So Biden is setting himself up for a self-inflicted wound if his support collapses. Right now, he's in the 50s among percentage points among people who want to say they're going to vote his name by write-in. And Phillips, though, is at 29% and climbing. So this race has not gotten much coverage. The media is in the tank for the White House. They've been cowed into submission, not reporting Biden's health problems and his light public schedule. But I think Biden could suffer a Lyndon Baines Johnson surprise next Tuesday.
Well, so this is really fascinating to me because this Phillips character has gotten virtually no attention. But when you
on
look
MSNBC, he has not appeared even once, not once on MSNBC.
And yet, does the parallel, though, break down? Because LBJ, of course, was being dragged down by Vietnam, which was very unpopular with the media class at that time. What does success, though, look like for Joe Biden? If he only comes in at 60 or 70%, is that where the boffins of the Democratic Party start to say, hang on, we really have alarm bells flashing on this?
Well, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, who were Democrats running for president and whose national popularity numbers at the time were not great, got over 80% of the vote in the Democratic primaries. If Biden hits 60%, I think that's survivable, especially because it's a write-in vote, and that requires some effort on the part of voters. If he falls below 50, then it's fire bell in the night. And Democrats will say, if he can't get a majority of Democrats in New Hampshire to vote for him, how in the world are we going to convince a majority of the general election voters to go for him?
Wow. John Fund, that is fascinating, and next week is going to be much less of a lay-down misere than I think a lot of people thought that it was going to be. John Fund, thank you so much, and welcome back, and we'll see you again throughout the year on the U.S. Report. A blame game has erupted between Texas and the Biden administration over the death of 3 migrants, a mother and 2 children, who drowned while trying to cross the border illegally last week. The White House claimed that the 3 had died after Texas officials blocked Border Patrol officials from entering the area to provide emergency assistance. This turned out not to be true. The White House was later forced to admit they were wrong after information in its own Department of Justice filing revealed the migrants had already been dead for an hour before Texas officials were even alerted to their drownings. But, of course, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre gave a non-answer about this when asked about it in a news conference yesterday.
Let's be sensitive here. 3 people died. 3 migrants died. 2 children and a woman. That was devastating. Devastating situation, heartbreaking situation. So let's be really mindful of what we're talking about here. I want to take a step back and just as you're talking about our statement, look, as I mentioned, a woman and 2 children died. They drowned near Eagle Pass, which is, as I said, devastating, and that Texas officials blocked Border Patrol from accessing the area. That's what was happening at that time.
Tragic, yes, but she was lying, and it all comes about after the Texas National Guard seized control of the Eagle Pass southern border crossing from the Border Patrol because they accused the feds, with pretty good reason, of perpetuating illegal crossings, including cutting through razor wire fences to help, as we have seen on this show many times before, people cross the border in the U.S. Joining me now to break all this down is the Daily Caller's investigative immigration reporter, Jenny Taylor. Jenny, thank you so much for coming on the U.S. Report. What's the latest, and walk us through this situation at Eagle Pass, where Texas has basically, as far as I can tell, taken control of the pass from U.S. border officials?
Absolutely. Texas has definitely pushed the limits of the federal government when it comes to border security, and in its latest action has taken control of city property, a city park known as Shelby Park in Eagle Pass, Texas, which is the site of mass crossings in recent months. So it's a big center point of the border crisis in the United States. Now, taking control of this property has meant that they have pushed out Border Patrol from accessing the area. Border Patrol did, of course, alert the Texas authorities down there to this drowning, but it was only after the drowning had occurred, after these deaths had occurred tragically. And that's what the Department of Justice is saying, actually, after the Biden administration and Democrats have been blaming this on Texas Governor Greg Abbott and his authorities. This is something that actually Border Patrol agents that I've talked to are applauding, the fact that they are able to free up some resources and have Texas take some of the burden on their shoulders. And they feel like Texas is actually doing things to secure the border, and behind the scenes, they actually work very well with the Texas Military Department and the Department of Public Safety there. One of the things with the state of Texas that we're seeing right now, when we talk about that back and forth over Shelby Park and jurisdiction over the border, I've actually been hearing from Border Patrol agents in the area that the federal government, that their supervisors, the DHS supervisors in Washington, are instructing them to wear body-worn cameras and to actually make sure that they are there to record any altercations between the state authorities as well. I just wanted to mention that because I think it's an interesting twist into all this after talking to sources before your show.
That is absolutely fascinating. So the suggestion then, Jenny, is essentially the feds are trying to find ways to then attack Texas for doing their job.
They're definitely keeping their agents on high alert. However, these agents are telling me that they're not working, any differently with DPS and the Texas Military Department. They work really well with them. So this is something that is coming from Washington, that they're being directed to, put the microscope on those Texas authorities and make sure to record any altercations and make sure to be on alert about that.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. I reckon this is going to be a very big issue over the next coming months. Jenny Taylor, we're going to have to leave it there, but we're going to bring you back in the weeks to come to keep talking about this. Thank you so much. Now, don't go anywhere, because after the break, we're going to be joined by Mike Doran, who will take us through the widening war in the Middle East and how the Biden administration is putting us all at risk. But first, this week, Americans celebrated the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights leader who famously called on all of us to judge each other by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. You know, the sort of stuff that would make him an alt-right fascist these days, but that's another story. Leading the tributes, of course, was Vice President Kamala Harris.
Today, we celebrate the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a visionary who saw what could be, unburdened by what had been.
Unburdened by what has been. Gosh, where have I heard that before?
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been. You know? What can be, unburdened by what has been. 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 What we can see, what we believe can be, unburdened by what has been. What can be, unburdened by what has been. What can be, unburdened by what has been.
Unburdened by original thought. That's what she is. Kamala, please get some new speechwriters, or maybe just a thesaurus. Honestly. Mike Doran and Middle East chaos coming home to roost next. Welcome back. Let's head over to the Middle East conflict now, where the violence is spreading well beyond Israel and Gaza, with Pakistan and Iran now trading blows, and the head of Israel's military admitting the likelihood of a war along the country's northern border with Lebanon is now much higher than in recent times. Meanwhile, Israel is continuing its push into Gaza. Qatar has brokered a deal with Israel and Hamas to allow medical supplies in, and all sorts of chaos is breaking out between Pakistan and Iran. Now, to break it all down and what it means for the presidential election, Hudson Institute senior fellow Michael Doran joins me now for all the latest. Michael, you've just spent the past 10 days in Israel speaking to people. What's the sentiment on the ground there, first of all?
Well, it's thanks for having me here, James. It's great to be back. In Israel, I found the country in an unprecedented situation. There's on the level of the people, there's been a kind of unification of everyone behind the war effort, but the elite remain divided, and it's creating all kinds of kind of paradoxes. On the one hand, you see Prime Minister Netanyahu is at the lowest level. He's polling lower than ever before. But the population has also moved significantly to the right. It's moved to the right, and it's unified. The immediate benefactor of this movement of unification is Benny Gantz, Netanyahu's rival, who's together with him in the national unity government for the moment, but he's polling very, very high because he represents that sense of unity that people have. But yet he's out of sync with the move to the right. So you have Netanyahu looking bad if there's an election, Gantz looking good, but Gantz out of sync with the population's move to the right, which means that they no longer accept the idea of a two-state solution, which, of course, the Biden administration is pushing very hard on the government. The result of this is probably going to be at some point a clash between Netanyahu and the Biden administration, possibly even leading to early elections, which would benefit Gantz. That's the kind of what's happening on the political level. I can go on and tell you about the military affairs if you'd like.
Well, what I actually wanted to ask about, Michael, too, is the broader strategic context, because since we've last spoken, we've seen this whole conflict erupting in the Red Sea, the Houthis firing on ships. They're backed by Iran. The U.S. has this whole sort of weird relationship with Iran, where the Biden administration has been continuing the Obama policy of trying to bring them in, empower them, give them money, and then now not ratcheting up the conflict and the response to the Houthis and to Iranian provocation. So I really wanted to get your thoughts on where the strategic next steps are for the U.S. and is the U.S. getting drawn into a wider conflict with Iran, whether or not the Biden administration wants it or not?
Well, absolutely. This is a wider conflict with Iran. They have defined it, the Biden administration has defined it as a war in Gaza. That is objectively not what it is, because Hezbollah is attacking Israel. Hezbollah, the major ally proxy of Iran in Lebanon, is attacking Israel. Proxies of Iran from Iraq and Syria are attacking American bases. And of course, we have the Houthis that you mentioned. The Houthis started attacking international shipping in mid-November. The U.S. only responded together with the British in mid-December. We're now in mid-January. The Houthis are still shooting missiles. They are not deterred. I mean, the important thing to realize here is that the Houthis achieve the effect that they want to achieve, that is a drastic reduction in shipping through the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal, whether they hit anything or not. I mean, if two guys go into a restaurant and start shooting guns at each other, even if they don't hit any of the diners, the restaurant clears out. The business is killed because people are shooting in the business. So the United States has failed to deter the Houthis, and international shipping companies are voting with their feet and moving everything around the Cape of Good Hope. So this policy has failed so far.
So basically, then, what I'm wondering is the Biden administration strategically unable to cope with what is essentially asymmetric warfare? I mean, they could clear the Houthis out tomorrow if they wanted to and be really brutal about it, but there doesn't seem to be any stomach for that sort of thing. They warned the Houthis that they were going to shoot at them the other day, which seems to me like in the Middle East that would be received as an incredible message of weakness. How does the Biden administration get out of this cycle, or is this going to wind up playing into the hands of somebody like Trump, who comes and says, we're not going to play these games anymore, and is going to be able to play on a much more sort of robust, shall we say, playing field?
Well, a lot can happen between now and the election, and when I say a lot can happen, I mean not that I'm imagining that the United States will escalate, but that the United States can make a lot more concessions to Iran. It's really you hit the nail on the head when you say that they have telegraphed their punches, and they have hit targets. The Americans in Yemen have hit targets that are of secondary or tertiary importance and value to the Houthis. They haven't hit leadership. They haven't hit, this is the key factor, any IRGC officials, any of the Iranian advisors who are there, playing a very important role in training, equipping, and advising the Houthis about their attacks in the Red Sea, and in giving them political cover, but also intelligence about how to carry out these attacks. The Biden administration is very proud of its Iran engagement strategy. It will not do any, it is shown time and time again that it is not willing to do anything to imperil it. It's going to take more, apparently, than just shutting down the shipping through the Suez Canal to make them actually try to deter Iran. I think what we're going to be seeing is more pressure on Israel to end the conflict in Gaza. That'll be the way, that would be the administration's preferred way to avoid conflict with Iran.
Michael Doran, the Biden administration wants to be pals with the mullahs and put pressure on Iran. That's just an utterly incredible situation the United States finds us in right now. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to discuss this more in the weeks and months to come. Really appreciate it. Now, stick around because in a moment we've got a very high-flying Only in America for you. But first, how about, let's do it. Let's have a new segment on the show. Call it Joe versus Reality. So this is a new segment where we're going to run here over the next 10 or 11 months, and the premise is a simple one. What happens when Joe Biden runs into the real world? Only, look, it's been so tough since the man has made a grand total of 5 public appearances since he went on Christmas vacation back in December. However, we did manage to dig up a little footage of him sneaking out of the bubble. Of course, as you might expect, it involved asking young girls about their age. 11. You don't say. Always good to check, sir, but speaking of reality, get a load of the president's answer when asked if there was indeed a crisis at the southern border.
Mr. President, would you call the situation on the southern border a crisis?
No. No, of course not. Because while normal people see an out-of-control border teeming with migrants into the country at a rate of hundreds of thousands a month, Joe Biden just looks at that and says, hey, bunch of future Democrat voters. For him, like Barack Obama before him, that's not a crisis. That's a path to permanent power. Only in America is next. Welcome back to the first U.S. report of 2024. And one thing is still the same. Yeah, that's right. It's time for a little segment we like to call Only in America. Well, I'll tell you what, it's been a pretty scary few weeks in the aviation business, what with doors falling off airplanes and jets colliding in Tokyo. But even scarier has been what's been discovered about the push to make diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, which really in this case ought to be spelled D-I-E, the foundation of the aviation industry. I mean, just the other day, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration said they wanted to hire more people with psychiatric problems. All in the name of diversity, of course. And that's besides the big woke pushes from every company from Boeing to United Airlines. So the question is, where does it all end? Have a look at this.
Welcome aboard, folks. We are very proud to share that your pilot is the most diverse pilot on record. She is a 3'2" transgender pansexual Native American man who identifies as a 6'tall Korean woman. Any volunteers to help reach the controls are welcome. You will want to buckle up as her epilepsy is often triggered by the flashing lights in the cockpit. Remember to keep a whisper volume level, as she may have to consult instructional videos as a refresher during the flight. Now, can we get a big cheer for diversity?
Well, you know what they say, go woke, go broken up in midair. Thanks to blogger Apoctos for that video, by the way. That's all the time we have for this week. Welcome back. It's going to be a really big year. I'll see you next week for more U.S. Report. Bye-bye.